that we may bring you The Tonight Show and The Tomorrow Show will each begin 1/2 hour later than usual tonight, so that we may bring you the following special report from NBC News.
For 24 hours now, they've come from all over, standing in the cold, the rain, outside this New York City apartment building. They've come to mourn and to celebrate the life and death of John Lennon, shot to death about this hour last night. Tonight, we report about the man and his music.
This is an NBC News special report. John Lennon, the man and his music. Here is NBC News correspondent Jane Pauley.
And good evening. If you lived in the last 20 years, you knew the name. If you grew up in the last 20 years, chances are you lived the music. Tonight we look at the man and the music he left behind. The vigil in his memory continues tonight. Stephen Fraser Lennon was gunned down.
Jane, it is raining now in New York City, but that doesn't mean that the crowd here outside of John Lennon's home has grown any smaller, just quieter, in part because of police actions to control the crowd, in part because many seem finally to be coming to the realization that John Lennon is gone. Before now, many seemed not to accept that fact.
4, 3.
The New York Daily News found a picture of Lennon made only 6 hours before his death. Lennon was signing his name on the cover of his latest recording at the request of the man who is now accused of his murder. That man is in a psychiatric ward tonight. Police say Mark David Chapman, 25 years old, is under constant watch. They say he has tried to kill himself on 2 earlier occasions. Chapman was sent to the hospital for examination and was denied bail at his arraignment this afternoon when he was charged with Lennon's death. An assistant district attorney told the court Chapman borrowed money and came to New York with the sole intention of killing John Lennon. The DA did not say why Chapman wanted to harm Lennon, but he outlined Chapman's actions from the time he reportedly bought a handgun in Honolulu to his arrival in New York a week ago. Chapman reportedly asked people at the YMCA where he stayed about Lennon. Witnesses said he spent 3 days waiting outside this landmark apartment building for John Lennon. His lawyer admits Chapman shot Lennon as Lennon and Yoko walked past the huge iron gate at the entrance to the Dakota. The doorman said that Chapman then dropped his gun and waited for police, while Lennon struggled to get inside the building and then collapsed. Now other people gather at the gate, listening to tapes of Lennon's music or to radio interviews. Some trade stories about Lennon's achievements. Most watch silently for a sight of Yoko Ono. Some mourners left flowers at the gate. Former Beatle Ringo Starr flew here from England to left the Lennon's apartment. Earlier today, Yoko Ono said there will be no funeral for John Lennon. Instead, she described a silent vigil in his memory, a date yet to be announced. And instead of the flowers that people are placing in the gate here at the Dakota, she asked for donations to the Spirit Foundation of New York City, which she described as John Lennon's personal charitable foundation. Jane?
Thank you, Stephen. It began in Liverpool. Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr all were born there, and they began playing there. First as the Quarrymen, and then as the Silver Beatles, and finally as the Beatles. They were weaned on rhythm and blues and early American rock. But as Lennon once said, we didn't sound like anybody else, that's all. They fused their style in the nightclubs of Hamburg, West Germany, and they perfected them in Liverpool. John Cochran reports from there tonight.
For John Lennon and the other Beatles, this is where it began. The Cavern Club, a warehouse basement where they found that the young people of Liverpool liked their music more than American groups, who until then had set the pace in pop music. But one of the Beatles' first managers, the late Brian Epstein, recalled that they still had a lot to learn.
The Beatles were then just 4 lads on that rather dimly lit stage, somewhat ill-clad, and the presentation was, well, left a little to be desired as far as I was concerned, because I've been interested in the theatre and acting for a long time. But amongst all that, something tremendous came over.
The Beatles' popularity soon spread far beyond Liverpool, but Lennon and McCartney often wrote about their hometown, songs about Strawberry Field and Penny Lane. Lennon had after his parents split up. A later manager, George Martin, recalled today that Lennon was deeply affected by his broken home.
Obviously, there were times when he was very abrasive, and he was sometimes bitter because he had a very strange life. You know, his early upbringing was a very cruel one. But he had a tremendous warmth as a person. He was a very lovely person, and an enormous sense of humor as well.
This is Penny Lane today. The barbershop that Lennon and McCartney wrote of is still here, and people still come here because the Beatles were once regular customers. But older residents have mixed feelings about the Beatles because they left Liverpool and rarely came back. The only memorial to the Beatles is this modest plaque outside the new Cavern Club, which replaced the old one that was demolished to make room for a parking lot. The Beatles fans here have long tried to get the city to put up a more substantial memorial to them. One idea was to put up statues in bronze. That idea was rejected by the city council as too expensive in a city where unemployment is the highest in England. At John Lennon's old high school, there is no plaque, no reminder of the days when he was regarded as a gifted but unruly student. But the students here remember him and his music. Did you ever want to see the Beatles get back together?
Yeah, I really did. That was one of the sort of things I was looking forward to most in life. Beatles together again. But it just won't happen now. It's just shocking. How could anyone do it?
John Cochran, NBC News, Liverpool.
Well, why Liverpool? Was it more than an accident of birth? Probably. Liverpool was a working man's city, and according to Lennon, so was rock and roll. Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis, they were working class, Lennon once said. The Beatles were slightly less working class, but their music could be tough. They did not forget where they came from. Lennon talked about that during a 1975 interview with Tom Snyder.
Your message was subliminal. You didn't have any axe to grind with social injustice, or did you?
No, our only axe was we were the first working class singers that stayed working class and pronounced it. Didn't try and change our accents, which in England were looked down upon, probably still are. Like a Bronx accent, it's equivalent to that. You know. The only change was our image, you know, being slightly... What do you want? What do you want?
Get me off the hook.
Yeah, you're right.
A Bronx accent, it could be a Brooklyn accent, it could be...
Oh, yeah, Brooklyn was the one I meant, actually.
Okay, all right, fine. Just get me off the hook.
Because that sounds like Liverpool. They talk like that there, duty, you know? I mean, all the stars in England before... There were a couple of sort of rock and roll stars before us, but any major star in England had to change his voice. They do it in America to get on TV and radio, right? Hi, I'm from nowhere. The one George Carlin does. Well, that goes in England, too.
Snyder's interview with Lennon will be shown in its entirety later tonight on The Tomorrow Show. For the Beatles, success in Liverpool was perhaps all they expected, but not likely. They were too innovative, too original. And by 1964, they had exploded, and there was no other word, onto the international top 40. They were doing things nobody was doing, Bob Dylan has said. They were pointing the direction where music had to go. So they came to the United States. Incongruous as it seems now, they made their first major public appearance here on the Ed Sullivan Show on a Sunday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time.
Star, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and John Lennon, the 3 shows for $10,000.
Tom Snyder asked Lennon about the crowds, the cheering, the adulation.
It got a little boring. I mean, it was great when it first happened. When you'd come on, there'd just be nothing but wow. Then we just became like lip-syncing, you know, miming. And sometimes things would break down and nobody'd know. And so it wasn't doing the music any good, you know?
When you guys were in the dressing rooms after these concerts, or when you were in the dressing room after the Ed Sullivan Show, where, my heavens, young people were just almost flinging themselves on stage,
yeah.
Didn't you ever wonder, are these people crazy? Are we that good? can we really produce this kind of reaction in people?
We didn't think whether we're that good or not. You've got to think you're good to do what we did, you know. It was like being in the eye of a hurricane, and so there was never a time when you thought, what's going on? And that was about as deep as it got. What is happening, or what? You know, you'd suddenly wake up in the middle of a concert or a happening, and think, what? How did I get here? You know. Mm-hmm. The last thing I remember was playing music in a club, and the next minute this. But we never thought about it too much because it was an ongoing thing. It was happening to us, and it was hard to see. You know, we were just in the middle, being ushered from room to room.
Inevitably, their popularity carried over to movies, and the movies were good. There was the music, of course, but beyond that, there was the sharp, slightly irreverent sense of humor. Richard Lester, who directed the first two Beatles movies, A Hard Day's Night and Help, said today that to him, Lennon represented a sense of optimism, a certainty that everything was possible. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is considered a classic. It may be the very best rock and roll album ever recorded, and it turned music around. Its appeal was to the young of this country, the young demonstrating against authority, the universities, the war, anyone over 30. For those into drugs, Sgt. Pepper had particular appeal. The cut Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was said to be a code for LSD. But mostly it was the war, Vietnam. And as the 60s drew to a close, it was the war that commanded the attention of Lennon and Yoko Ono. Wherever they could, John and Yoko used the media to advertise the peace crusade.
It's a part of our advertising campaign for peace, following the Bed-In in Amsterdam and Montreal, and the MBE, and everything else we're doing.
Did you get encouraging reactions after the Bed-In and after the returning of MBE?
Yes, the Bed-In and all the things we do take time to have effect, you know. I mean, the initial effect is like throwing a stone in the water, but we're still getting reactions to the Amsterdam Bed-In now. That's the ripples that take time to reach the shore, you know.
And do you really believe that such actions will be a contribution to, well, peace?
Well, I mean, it's like asking Mr. Coca-Cola, do you really believe your advertisements are contributing towards selling Coca-Cola? You know, asking, it certainly does contribute. We believe in advertising, you know.
Lennon married Yoko Ono in 1969. He once said that he hoped he would die first because he couldn't go on without her. It was a marriage that admittedly had its rough moments, more notably its unusual ones, as witness this scene soon after their wedding, when they were promoting the cause of world peace.
614, hiya, Montreal. This is the channel program. Doing our thing on a Thursday night till around 9. And listen, we're happening again from John Lennon's bedside during the John and Yoko Lion for world peace.
There are some who blame John's wife and some who blame Paul's wife for the breakup of the Beatles. Whatever the reason, they did split up in 1971, and the subsequent careers of the four showed that the whole was greater than the parts. In his talk with Tom Snyder, Lennon talked about the end of their working together.
We didn't break up because we weren't friends. We just broke up out of sheer boredom, you know, and boredom creates tension.
Why is what you're doing now not boring when that was?
Because I can change musicians whenever I like. And you know, because we were together much longer than the public knew us. You know, it wasn't just from 64. I was 24 in 64, and I've been playing with Paul since I was 15. And he's very nice. and George about a year later or something. So it's a long time we spent together in all the most extraordinary circumstances.
Do you think John and Yoko helped to end the war?
Yes.
No question about it.
I think, yes, absolutely, no question. I mean, I'm not saying they themselves ended the war, but they were part of the process, and a big part of the process that ended it. And that process was, you know, worldwide, and it had also, you know, all sorts of reasons it ended. But yes, they were part of it.
You knew him personally.
Yeah.
What was he like?
He was warm, and he was very witty, very funny, and he had it all in him. He saw a lot of contradictions in him, but one thing he never hurt anybody. You know, he was not a mean person in any way. You know, he may have carried on, but he was never mean. You know, he wasn't, and he was, you know, but basically I think full of hope.
Did you like the new album?
Yeah. That starting over is just a charm. I mean, it's so pretty. When I first heard that, you know, it's like I had to hear it again and again. Because it's so lovely, it's lilting.
So domestic, though.
Yeah, well, that's what he was doing. And he was writing about his life all the time.
Domestic because John Lennon wrote Starting Over as a love song for his wife, Yoko Ono, on an album called Double Fantasy, which is a collection of love songs to and from Yoko Ono and John Lennon. Right now it is still raining outside in New York, still very cold, and the crowd is still standing around the gates of the Dakota apartment building where NBC correspondent Stephen Frazier is still standing by. Stephen?
Jane, some of these people weren't able to come here until this evening. They had intended to come here all day, and as soon as they were free of earlier obligations, they came by to do what they could and find out what they could. Sheila Kelly, Manhattan, did you come here with anything particular to say?
No.
Why did you come?
Just to show my respect.
And are you waiting for something to happen here?
No, it's just pure respect. It's you know, for Yoko and Sean and John.
Frank Majorano, very briefly, what's your one thought here?
Well, I felt like I owed something to John Lennon, who really gave us so much during the 60s and so much good music, and he was such a fine person and a good man, and I think I owe it to him because he's done an awful lot for us.
Thank you.
John Lennon always did the unexpected. 5 years, stopping music after a long string of international hits. Well, when he emerged this fall, as we said, he had been engaged in a couple not-so-extraordinary pursuits, raising a son and falling in love with his wife. Well, they always said that John Lennon was something of a mad prophet, always on the cutting edge of the latest trend. And now John Lennon was into family. What might have come next had he lived? We can only imagine. Imagine, the title of one of Lennon's most memorable songs, and it was the theme music for this BBC documentary on John and Yoko.